The most devastating message you can send a narcissist isn't angry, emotional, or long. It's calm. And once it's sent, you disappear. Because the moment they realize you are no longer reacting, explaining, or hoping, the power dynamic collapses. If this resonates, pause for a moment, take a breath, and remind yourself you don't need the perfect words to be free. You need the courage to stop explaining. If you want more clarity on boundaries, healing, and emotional detachment, stay with this conversation. The most powerful goodbye is emotionally neutral, because narcissistic dynamics are not driven by logic or truth. They are driven by emotional regulation through other people. When you show strong emotion, love, anger, grief, rage, desperation, you are still participating in the system that keeps them psychologically fed. Emotional neutrality removes you from that system. It signals that you are no longer available to absorb, reflect, or stabilize their inner chaos. This is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on external reactions to feel real, important, or in control. A dramatic goodbye may feel satisfying in the moment, but it actually reassures the narcissist that they still matter, that they still have access to your emotional core. Even anger confirms significance. Even tears confirm power. Emotional neutrality, on the other hand, communicates something far more threatening. You have already processed the loss internally. You are not trying to be seen, understood, or validated anymore. You are not asking for repair. You are not negotiating your worth. This kind of neutrality is often misunderstood as coldness, but it is not cold at all. It is regulated. It is the voice of someone who has stopped hoping the other person will suddenly develop insight, empathy, or accountability. It reflects emotional graduation from the cycle. Narcissists expect intensity because intensity keeps the bond alive. Calm disrupts their predictive model of you. They no longer know how to pull you back in, provoke you, or reset the power imbalance. An emotionally neutral goodbye also protects you. When you remove emotion from the message, you prevent future self-betrayal. There is nothing in the message they can twist, mock, argue with, or use to reopen contact. You are not giving them material. You are closing the door without slamming it, which paradoxically feels more final than rage ever could. Neutrality is not about being polite or kind to them. It is about being loyal to your nervous system. It says you are no longer available for chaos, drama, or emotional labor. It shows that you have stopped confusing intensity with connection and pain with proof of love. And when that realization lands, it quietly dismantles the entire dynamic they depended on to feel powerful. Narcissistic injury is not caused by being disliked, criticized, or even exposed. It is caused by a sudden loss of control over the emotional environment. Control is how a narcissist maintains psychological equilibrium. They regulate their self-worth by provoking reactions, shaping narratives, and positioning themselves as the emotional center of the relationship. When that control disappears, the injury cuts far deeper than any insult ever could. Anger, confrontation, and emotional outbursts may look like strength, but to a narcissist, they are evidence of influence. If they can still make you cry, argue, defend yourself, or explain your pain, they are still controlling the emotional field. Even rejection framed with passion keeps them relevant. It reassures them that they still matter enough to move you. This is why attempts to call them out so often backfire. Exposure gives them attention, and attention restores their sense of power. What truly destabilizes them is the moment they realize they no longer have access to your reactions. Your calm is not read as maturity, it is read as threat. When you stop responding emotionally, They experience it as a disappearance of the mirror they used to see themselves reflected in. Without that mirror, their internal structure begins to wobble. This is the core of narcissistic injury. Loss of control also shatters their narrative. Narcissists depend on predictable roles: the pursuer, the pleaser, the fixer, the explainer. When you step out of that role without drama, they cannot reassign you another one. They may attempt to provoke you through guilt, nostalgia, or sudden kindness, not because they care, but because they are trying to regain regulation. If those attempts fail, the panic escalates. This is why indifference is often followed by erratic behavior. The injury is not about losing you as a person. It is about losing authority over your inner world. They are confronted with the terrifying realization that they are no longer the reference point around which your emotions revolve. That is when the power dynamic collapses, not because you attacked them, but because you quietly removed yourself from their control entirely. Explaining yourself feels instinctive because healthy relationships reward clarification, accountability, and repair. In narcissistic dynamics, however, explanation becomes a trap. When you explain, you are not being heard for understanding. You are being mined for leverage. Every detail you offer gives them information about your values, your fears, your limits, and your emotional pressure points. What you believe is communication is to them data collection. Explanations keep the cycle alive because they signal uncertainty. The very act of explaining implies that the other person has authority to evaluate your reasons, approve your decision, or debate your reality. Narcissists thrive in that space. They do not seek resolution. They seek engagement. When you explain why you were leaving, why something hurt you, or why a boundary exists, they hear an invitation to argue, invalidate, minimize, or reframe. The conversation shifts from your decision to their interpretation of it. This is why explanations are often met with confusion, denial, or deliberate misunderstanding. It is not that your words were unclear. It is that clarity would end the interaction, and ending the interaction threatens their control. They will twist your explanation into proof that you are emotional, unstable, selfish, dramatic, or confused. Suddenly, you find yourself explaining the explanation, defending the defense, and justifying the justification, while the original issue quietly disappears. Clarity, by contrast, is brief and non-negotiable. Clarity does not ask to be understood. It states a position and accepts that the other person may dislike it. It sounds like a decision, not a plea. When you are clear, you are no longer trying to manage their feelings or correct their perception of you. You are simply naming your boundary and acting in alignment with it. Clarity ends the cycle because it removes the narcissist's favorite tool, debate. There is nothing to dissect, no emotional thread to pull on, no vulnerability to exploit. It denies them the performance of conflict and the illusion of influence. Most importantly, clarity protects you from self-abandonment. You stop over-explaining in hopes of being seen and start standing in your reality without requiring agreement, validation, or empathy from someone who has consistently shown they cannot offer it. Indifference is often misunderstood as weakness or avoidance, but in narcissistic dynamics, it is the most destabilizing response possible. Narcissists are emotionally calibrated to intensity. They expect reactions because reactions confirm their impact. Whether the response is love, rage, jealousy, or heartbreak does not matter nearly as much as the fact that a response exists. Indifference removes that confirmation entirely. It communicates not anger, but absence of emotional investment, and that is what makes it so threatening. When you react strongly, the narcissist feels oriented. They know where they stand in your inner world. They can adjust their behavior to regain control, escalate conflict, or pull you back in. Indifference erases that map. They can no longer tell whether they matter, whether they are winning, or whether they still have access to you. This uncertainty creates far more distress than open conflict ever could. Confrontation often gives the illusion of power because it feels assertive. In reality, confrontation still centers the narcissist. It signals that they are important enough to warrant emotional expenditure. Even calling out their behavior can become a form of engagement if it leads to argument, defensiveness, or prolonged interaction. Indifference refuses to play that game. It does not attempt to correct, expose, or punish. It simply withdraws emotional energy. This withdrawal is not passive. It is a conscious shift of focus away from the narcissist and back toward your own internal stability. Indifference means you are no longer scanning for their reactions, anticipating their moves, or rehearsing conversations in your head. You are not trying to make them understand what they did wrong or how much they hurt you. You are no longer emotionally auditioning for closure. To the narcissist, this feels like being replaced by nothing. Not another person, not a dramatic exit, but a vacuum where attention used to be. That absence is intolerable because it exposes the truth they avoid. Their sense of importance was being borrowed from your emotional engagement. When that engagement disappears, so does their perceived power. Indifference does not announce victory. It simply steps out of the arena, leaving the narcissist standing alone with an empty stage and absolutely no one left to watch. It simply makes the game impossible to continue. Closure is often imagined as a conversation where both people finally understand each other, acknowledge the pain, and part ways with mutual clarity. In narcissistic relationships, that fantasy becomes a prolonged source of suffering. Narcissists are not invested in mutual understanding or emotional resolution. They are invested in preserving their self-image and maintaining control. Waiting for them to provide closure means placing your healing in the hands of someone who benefits from keeping you unsettled. This is why attempts to get closure from a narcissist often end in more confusion than relief. They may minimize your experience, deny events, rewrite history, or suddenly play the victim. Each response destabilizes you further and pulls you back into the dynamic you are trying to escape. The hope for closure keeps you emotionally tethered, constantly revisiting the relationship in search of a moment that will make it all make sense. Self-generated closure is different. It begins when you accept that understanding their motives is not required for your healing. You do not need their admission, apology, or insight for your pain to be valid. Closure is the internal decision to stop seeking answers from someone who has consistently distorted the truth. It is the moment you stop asking why they did what they did and start acknowledging what the relationship cost you. Giving yourself closure also means grieving what you hoped the relationship could be, not just what it was. Many people stay stuck because they are attached to potential, to early moments of intensity, or to the version of the narcissist they believed might eventually emerge. Closure arrives when you recognize that potential was part of the illusion, not an unfinished story. This internal process restores agency. You are no longer waiting for the other person to say the right thing or behave differently so you can finally move on. You decide that the chapter is over because continuing to reread it harms you. Closure, in this sense, is not an ending given to you. It is an ending you choose, grounded in self-respect rather than mutual agreement, and sustained by your willingness to stop reopening the wound in search of validation from someone who was never capable of providing it. A final message only works when it is followed by silence, because the silence is what transforms words into a boundary. Without silence, the message becomes just another exchange, another emotional loop the narcissist can enter, manipulate, or prolong. The power of a final message is not in its phrasing, but in the behavioral shift that comes after it. Silence communicates what words never can, that access has been revoked. Narcissists are conditioned to test limits. When you send a message and then remain available, they learn that boundaries are negotiable. They may respond with guilt, charm, rage, confusion, or vulnerability, not because they are reflecting, but because they are probing for cracks. Any reply, even a calm one, teaches them that persistence works. Silence shuts down that learning process. It removes feedback, and without feedback, they cannot adjust their tactics. Silence also protects you from emotional regression. After a goodbye message, emotions often surge. Doubt creeps in. You may feel the urge to clarify, soften, or reassure. Responding in those moments usually leads to self-betrayal because it reopens a door you intentionally closed. Silence gives your nervous system time to recalibrate. It allows your decision to settle into your body without being immediately challenged. From the narcissist perspective, silence is intolerable because it eliminates control. They cannot correct the narrative in real time. They cannot provoke a reaction to reestablish dominance. They are left alone with their interpretation, which often leads to obsession, escalation, or sudden attempts at reconciliation. None of these responses indicate growth. They indicate distress over lost access. Importantly, silence is not punishment. It is not designed to hurt them. It is designed to preserve you. When silence follows a final message, it signals emotional completion. You are no longer negotiating reality, defending your perception, or seeking understanding. You are acting as if the decision has already been made, because it has. This is why breaking silence later often feels so destabilizing. It collapses the boundary retroactively and reinforces the belief that your limits are temporary. When silence is maintained, the goodbye message becomes irreversible in practice, not just in theory. Silence is the action that turns intention into freedom and confirms that the goodbye was not a tactic, but a conclusion rooted in self-respect and emotional finality. Boundaries feel cruel to narcissists because they are experienced not as limits, but as a removal of leverage. In healthy relationships, boundaries are understood as self-protection and mutual respect. In narcissistic dynamics, boundaries are interpreted as rejection, defiance, or attack because they interfere with the narcissist's ability to extract emotional regulation from others. When you set a boundary, you are not just saying no to a behavior, you are saying no to their access. Narcissists rely on emotional permeability. They need to be able to intrude, provoke, and influence in order to feel significant. Boundaries disrupt this by creating separation where there used to be enmeshment. The sudden absence of access is destabilizing because it removes the narcissist's sense of control over the relational field. They can no longer reach in and adjust your emotions to suit their needs. This is why boundaries often provoke disproportionate reactions. What looks like a simple statement of limits to you feels like abandonment or humiliation to them. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, unforgiving, or cruel. These accusations are not reflections of your behavior. They are expressions of distress at losing leverage. By framing your boundary as harm, They attempt to guilt you into reopening access. Boundaries are also threatening because they expose the narcissist's dependence. When you stop accommodating, fixing, or absorbing emotional fallout, it becomes clear how much regulation they were outsourcing to you. This exposure is deeply uncomfortable. Rather than sit with that discomfort, they often attack the boundary itself, insisting it is unnecessary or unfair. Maintaining boundaries requires emotional consistency, not explanation. Each time you defend or justify a boundary, it weakens its function by turning it into a discussion. Boundaries work when they are enacted behaviorally, not argued verbally. This is why follow-through matters more than wording. When boundaries are held, the narcissist is forced to confront a reality they resist. Other people are separate, autonomous, and not obligated to serve as emotional infrastructure. To them, this feels like cruelty because it ends the illusion of entitlement. In truth, boundaries are not acts of harm. They are acts of self-respect that clarify where you end and someone else begins. And that clarity is intolerable to someone who relies on blurred lines to maintain control. The goal is freedom, not winning. Because framing the goodbye as a victory over the narcissist keeps you psychologically tied to them. Winning still centers them as the reference point. It keeps your healing dependent on their reaction, their regret, or their collapse. That mindset quietly preserves the power dynamic you are trying to escape, just inverted. True freedom begins when their internal state no longer determines your sense of resolution. Many people fantasize about the narcissist finally realizing what they lost, feeling remorse, or spiraling in panic. While those reactions may occur, they are not reliable, permanent, or necessary. When your focus is on whether they are suffering, you are still monitoring them, still emotionally invested, still waiting for proof that leaving was justified. That vigilance drains energy and delays recovery. Freedom requires disengagement from the scoreboard altogether. Narcissistic dynamics train people to equate intensity with meaning. Winning feels intense. Letting go feels unfamiliar and quiet. That quiet can initially feel empty or anticlimactic, which is why people are tempted to re-engage, check in, or reopen contact. But that quiet is not loss. It is space returning to your nervous system. It is the absence of constant emotional threat, hypervigilance, and self-doubt. Choosing freedom means accepting that the narcissist may never understand, admit fault, or change. It means releasing the hope that your final message will transform them or rewrite the story. The goodbye is not a lesson for them. It is a line in the sand for you. It marks the moment you stop organizing your behavior around someone else's pathology. Freedom shows up in subtle ways. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop anticipating their reactions. You stop needing to prove your reality. Your energy slowly redirects toward your own life, your own values, and your own sense of self. This redirection is what actually dissolves the bond, not any particular wording or strategy. When freedom becomes the goal, the goodbye message loses its emotional charge. It becomes simply a practical step, not a symbolic weapon. You are no longer trying to shatter them. You are choosing to step out of a system that required you to abandon yourself to maintain connection. And that choice, repeated consistently, is what ultimately restores your autonomy and peace.